Hey guys, it's Whitney. It has been a long time since I've been in front of a camera. I unintentionally took the summer off. It was a good summer, but I had a lot of health issues and a lot of things going on, so I didn't really feel like filming any videos. And a lot of times I was hurting so bad I didn't even feel like reading. But I'm on the up and up. I'm getting better every day, and I finally feel like filming a video. So here we are. I haven't done a wrap up since May, so instead of doing like a 30 book wrap up for June, July, and August, I thought I could do like the best and most disappointing of the summer. So I think I'll start with the most disappointing. That way we end on a positive note in the video, but I'll kind of like go back and forth from most disappointing to my favorites of the summer. So I guess that's what we'll do. And then, I don't know, I guess the other books that didn't make the cut are just lost to the abyss. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. We may go over those at some point or not. If they're not really that memorable, I don't really see the point. But anyway, I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be back in front of a camera and feeling better. So let's get right into the video. Okay, so the most disappointing book that I read this summer was a book called Bound by Donna Jo Napoli, I think is how you say her last name. And I read it for Tiffany's book bingo for the summer to get the one-word title spot. And it was like a retelling of Cinderella, like a Chinese retelling of Cinderella. This daughter is bound to her stepmother and her stepsister after her father dies, and she really sees no way out from the situation because of the culture that she lives in. She can't just leave and go get married, so she's kind of just stuck. And her feet, it talked a lot about foot binding, and her feet are not bound. So she can do things that her stepsister cannot because she's in the process of binding her feet, and it's extremely painful. So she does a lot of the cooking and the cleaning, typical Cinderella type story. The reason I put it on my most disappointing list is because there were several times in the story that the author just said something kind of random, and it completely took me out of the story, and it was kind of jarring. I did enjoy the book. I enjoyed all of these books that I'm going to talk about, but I don't know. It was weird the way that the author worded some things, and I'm not going to get into it because a lot of it was kind of inappropriate things, and it would just be thrown in there, and I'd be like, what? Where in the world did that come from? It was just kind of strange. So yeah, so that was like my most disappointing book of the summer, I feel like. Okay, so now on the positive end, one of the best books I read this summer was a book that was recommended to me for another book bingo square. It was like a book recommended by a friend. So my daughter recommended it to me, and she had been hyping it up and she wanted me to read it, and it's called The Bookshop of Dust and Dreams by Mindy Thompson. And I really enjoyed this book. It's a middle grade fantasy. It's a standalone, and it takes place in a magical bookshop. So you can only enter this bookshop if you have need of a bookshop. Like, it's really comforting and cozy, and the bookshop is almost alive. And so once you've been to a bookshop, you can always go back. You have like a special key, and you can always get to the bookshop. So there are regulars that come in and they meet. Well, during the course of the book, something happens to the bookshop, and it almost seems like it's dying. And so this young girl who her father has taken care of the bookshop. So Poppy's family has always been the owners of the bookshop, and she takes it upon herself because her father gets sick to try to save the bookshop. And it was just really fun and comforting and wholesome. It was a good book to read, and I would recommend it to anyone who's looking for a wholesome, feel-good middle grade story. Okay, so my next disappointing book of the summer was I'd Rather Be Reading by Anne Bogle. And I love Anne Bogle. Every Friday she sends out an email listing like a ton of her favorite links of the week and articles that she's read that she enjoys and she wants to pass on. And I love reading those emails. I love clicking on the links in it. They talk about everything from books to games to pop culture, just whatever, she finds interesting, she passes along. And I've read her blog for years. And so I thought I would really like this book. It's just a nonfiction book of a collection of essays that she's written about her love of reading and how reading has impacted her life. And I don't know, it just kind of fell short for me. It wasn't anything spectacular. And as I was reading it, I kind of got the feeling of, I've read this before. And I think some of the essays in the book were actually blog posts, and I've read them before. I don't know, but that's kind of how it seemed. And it was just, I don't know, a little lackluster for me, even though I felt like I should love it because it's a book all about the love of reading. I don't know, it just missed the mark for me. Okay, so the next book that I totally loved this summer and I really enjoyed was Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. And for some reason, I kept putting this book off, but there's a prompt from Tiffany's Book Bingo for the summer to read a library book, and I had checked this out for far too long, and it was way past due, so I decided I was just going to read it for that prompt, and I ended up loving it so much. Marcellus the octopus was my favorite character, and that sounds ridiculous, I guess, that an octopus could be your favorite character, but I don't know, it had the found family element, and the main character, Tova, she was just, I don't know, someone who I really enjoyed reading about. She did her job at the aquarium. She was a cleaner in the aquarium, and she would go in after it was closed, but she took her job so seriously. And I love people like that in real life and in books, but she took her job so seriously, even though some people will be like, oh, you're just a cleaner, it's not a big deal. Well, it was a big deal to her, and I don't know, I just really liked that. And the way that the author weaved the friendship between Tova and Marcellus, the octopus who lived in the aquarium, and a young man named Eric, was just really, really cool, and I really enjoyed it. Okay, so the next book on my most disappointing of the summer was The Buried Giant by, I'm gonna butcher this, it's Kazuo Ishiguro. Sorry, I know I butchered that, but I have heard such great things about this author, and I was really looking forward to reading this book, and I enjoyed the book, but I didn't love it. But it was so meandering. Like the main couple sets off from their village that is that's having I know everyone across the board is having memory loss. There's just large pockets of time that they don't remember. And so this couple is setting out to find their son who lives in another village. And so along the way, they're meandering through and they meet lots of people, and it's just so long and drawn out to get to the point. And then the final, I don't know, 3 or 4 chapters is where all of the action takes place, and when you get to the point of the story, it's really great and it's a really good story, but my goodness, it took so long to get there that by the end, it kind of diminished the point of the story. You know what I mean? Like, it just wasn't, I don't know. I personally did not enjoy it a lot. I did enjoy the author's writing, so I will give him another shot. I believe he doesn't write fantasy very often, and this was his first foray into fantasy. Maybe, I don't know, but I feel like that might be the case. I feel like his other books are not fantasy that I've seen. But yeah, it was just kind of long and meandering and a little bit boring and disappointing until the last few chapters, and then it was wonderful. So yeah. Okay, so the next book on my list for books that I really enjoyed this summer. Some of my favorites of the summer is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and I believe this is going to be a duology, but I don't know, I feel like it's kind of having its moment right now and it's kind of blowing up, but I really did enjoy it. It was kind of like a historical fantasy, and it follows two rival journalists who are reporting on this war, and so these two rival journalists are connected through a magical typewriter. So Iris thinks that she's writing letters to her brother who is missing in the war, and she's slipping them under her door and they disappear. So she's like, okay, no clue. Well, then a letter comes back and she doesn't realize this, but it's from her arch nemesis, the other journalist who works with her, Roman, Kit. And so they have a correspondence. So she realizes that it's not her brother, but she doesn't know who it is. And so they develop a friendship and a correspondence through these magical letters, through these typewriters. As they're developing this friendship, a lot takes place, and they're in the middle of a war. And so it's just, and this war is between the gods. It's not even between the people. But anyway, it kind of dipped a little bit about halfway to 3/4 through the book for me. It got a little bit repetitive. The same thing was happening over and over, and the story wasn't really progressing. But then it picked back up, and I don't know. But so outside of that little dip, it was a really enjoyable read for me. It was something that was just fun and quick to fly through. So I don't know. I really enjoyed it. So I've got 2 more disappointing books and then 2 more books that I really enjoyed. So the next disappointing book is Walking with Sam by Andrew McCarthy. I really thought I was going to like this book. It's about Andrew McCarthy, who is an actor. I believe he's in Pretty in Pink. And he is taking his teenage son, and they're going to walk the Camino de Santiago. And I thought I would love this book. I love books about walking. I've been really intrigued by the Camino de Santiago specifically recently, and I don't know, I thought this memoir was going to be it for me, and I start reading it, and the first few pages I'm like, yes, I'm going to love it, and then I didn't really. I mean, I enjoyed it, but for me personally, it felt more about the author's relationship with Sam, his son, than it did about the walk. And I wanted more information about the walk. You know, I wanted more about the towns they stopped in, or about what they ate, or about where they slept, or the struggles. The way he wrote this, it seemed like a walk in the park. I mean, he pretty much walked all day, and then he had to put his feet up the wall, and then he was good to go. And I don't know. I don't feel like that's accurate. I don't know. Maybe he's in super good shape, and then his son would just walk ahead of him with his headphones for miles, and they'd meet up at the next town, and it just kind of felt, I don't know, just disjointed, and it was a big disappointment for me. I really thought I would rate it 5 stars, and it would be one of my favorite reads of the year, because I just read earlier in the year Grandma Gatewood's Walk, and it was a 5-star, and it was one of my favorite reads of the year. So this one was just kind of disappointing. There was a lot of language in it as well, which I'm not sure. I've had this discussion with lots of people, but I don't hear the words in my head as I read. So a lot of times I can read a book and not even notice the language, but I did in this book because it was, specific language that I did not care for. But I don't know. It just wasn't my favorite. So, which is a bummer, but that's okay. 2 more of my most favorite this summer. I'm going to go with Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Honestly, it's probably my favorite read of the summer, but I feel like Brandon Sanderson books are always my favorite reads when I do wrap-ups, so I'm trying to change it up. I'm trying to not give him the number 1 spot all the time, but I loved Oathbringer. This is the 3rd book in the Stormlight Archive, and it focuses on Dalinar and Dalinar's backstory. And I love Dalinar. He's amazing. He's one of my favorites. And getting his backstory and learning some things about him as he's remembering them himself was just so good. And there's a large section of the book where Kaladin is in Shadesmar, which is like a really cool aspect of the book. And it's just, I mean, I can't say a lot about it because it's the third book in the series, but it was wonderful. As usual, all of the Stormlight Archive books that I've read are phenomenal. My favorite is still Words of Radiance, because I don't know, I just love that one so much. But this one is probably the second. I liked it more than I liked The Way of Kings. So yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive. Okay, so next up, this kind of hurts me a little bit. My most disappointing read of the summer was The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England by Brandon Sanderson. And this is one of his secret projects. It was his secret project number 2. And man, it was okay, but it was definitely a disappointment. It's not one of my favorite Sanderson books by far. And coming off the heels of Secret Project number 1, Tress of the Emerald Sea, which was so good, that made the disappointment even larger. You know what I mean? It was just a bummer. It kind of reminded me of his book, what is it, Alcatraz and the Evil versus the Evil Librarians, which is also not one of my favorite books of Sanderson's. I didn't even go on to finish that series, but it just, the humor was not my style of humor. It was just kind of strange. It was just kind of strange, and it was okay. But suffice it to say, it was the biggest disappointment of the summer. And I don't know. If you're going to read a Sanderson, don't read that one. Those are my only thoughts. Okay, so my most favorite read of the summer, it could be interchangeable with Oathbringer, but my most favorite book of the summer has to be A Natural History of Dragons by Marie Brennan. And it is the first book in the Lady Trent series. And I loved this book so much. We read it for book club with all of the homeschool moms, and everyone across the board loved this book. I've already bought the second book. I want to continue in the series for sure. So Lady Trent is writing her memoirs. So you know that she is older, and you know that all of these events that are unfolding, she survives. So she's writing from a place, she's writing about her own history. And I loved getting to know her. She starts when she's a young girl and how she got into how she became interested in dragons, and then it progresses into her marriage and how she has to kind of, because this is set in like Victorian times, it's kind of like Jane Austen but with dragons. So she has to kind of navigate her marriage and how she fits into society, because women don't do what she wants to do. They don't go out and hunt for dragons or study dragons or pursue science. Women didn't do that in her day, and so she has to navigate that. And just, I loved how much she loved dragons. It was just, she was so invested, and it was, I don't know, I felt like a lot of people could maybe think this book is slow paced or boring, but I did not find that to be true at all. It's not plot driven per se, but there is plot, but it just, I don't know, it was just so good. I loved the way that the author did this. And we were talking to all of the people in the book club, and one of the ladies said, I had to stop when I was reading this and look up the book that she references that her father got her when she was young, that kind of piqued her interest about dragons. She's like, I had to look it up to see if it was another book, like if the author wrote another book because that's how immersed I was in the story. And that's so true. Like, it just felt so immersive the way that the author wrote this book. And I would definitely recommend it to any fantasy lover, or non-fantasy lovers. And that's what we told the people in our book club. We were kind of dipping our toes into fantasy, so we wanted to read something shorter and not too huge with world building and all of that. And even they loved it, and I'm gonna give it to Savannah Grace to read. It was just so good. It was so good. I recommend it to anybody. So anyway, so there are the top 5 books I read this summer and the 5 most disappointing books I read this summer. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm glad to be back in front of the camera, making videos, talking about books. I've missed talking about books. We just recently went to my daughter's volleyball nationals, and as we're waiting in line at Dutch Bros to get a coffee, this guy looks into the car and sees the book I'm reading, and then we sit there for a good 5 minutes talking about books. And I was like, man, I really miss talking about books with people. So I'm glad to be back talking about books. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.